Presenting
The Complete
Orson Welles
and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
as the third man.
Stand by.
We'll be on the air in 15 seconds, Mr. Wells. Yes, I know.
Stand by, everybody.
Mercury Theater on the Air presents Orson Welles as Count Dracula in his own version of Bram Stoker's great novel,
Who knows
Dracula.
what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Hello world, welcome to The Complete Orson Welles, brought to you by Dwayne Old Time Radio. This podcast will feature various classic radio programs ranging mostly from 1936 to 1952 that Orson either produced and directed, was featured on, or starred as a guest. If you enjoy my podcast, you can subscribe to receive notifications of new posts. Subscribing is free and only takes a moment. New episodes are posted weekly. If inclined, please leave a rating and or review on your preferred podcast service. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoyed the genius of Mr. Welles. We're going to start the month of June with, it's not really a series, it was more of a loan drive to raise money for the troops. It's a rather long episode, about 90 minutes, so sit tight or listen to it in parts, however you listen to the podcast. This one is titled Fifth War Loan Drive, which took place in Texarkana, Texas. And this aired June 12th, 1944.
We wish to thank the Saucony Vacuum Oil Company, sponsors of Raymond Graham Swing, the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company, sponsors of Ted Malone, and Charles E. Hires and Company, sponsors of Height Time for Hires, for their courtesy in relinquishing the time for their broadcasts, which are usually heard on many of these stations during the next hour, in order that the Blue Network may bring you the special opening program of the Fifth War Loan Drive, which follows immediately.
The United States Treasury Department brings you now a special broadcast.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles. Tonight, the eyes of all the world are on the soldiers and sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. In the words of their Supreme Commander, they've embarked upon a great crusade. The when of the invasion was a well-kept military secret, but not the why of it. This broadcast is about the why of it. We're going to hear from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, and also from a lot of other people who, like him and like you and me, have a big stake in this war. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of the United States Treasury, Mr. Henry Morgenthau, Jr.
I have a message for you, for civilian America, from our military leaders. Here it is in a couple of words. The war isn't over yet. Our military leaders and the men fighting under their command ardently hope and sincerely believe that there are no Americans who need to be told that this is the wrong time to relax. Tonight, let us tell each other what we dare not forget. This is the time for new effort. This is the time for fresh exertion. The time for more from all of us. More of everything. Everything we're called on to give for this great crusade. Everything we're called on to make for it with our hands. Everything we must hold steadfast in our hearts. This is a time for reaffirming that faith by which we live, that fighting faith with which our country, together with all free countries, defend its life today, that marching faith by which free peoples are moving into the future.
Which way you going?
Hey! Hi! Crossing against the light.
rights, old-timer. Don't you know the rules?
Don't know the rules, Mr. Policeman. I'm a hermit.
A what?
A hermit. I don't know the rules. Been holed up quite some time.
Well, what's your step?
We take you now to London, England, to present the British
Hi.
newscaster, Mr. Percy Howe.
Hi, what's going on? What's that he's saying?
It's all about Cherbourg, the city in France. It looks like we've almost taken it. My boy. I've got a boy. I think he's over there.
Where? Where is it? Over where?
You kidding?
What's that? The liberation. The president says that's what it is. That's right, the liberation.
I'm a hermit. Just got into town. I hadn't heard.
Long-Tom artillery. Allied warships in 2 days have carried out...
Hi there.
Hi.
What you got there, little boy? What's in that can?
Facts, waste facts, mister.
What you gonna do with it?
Take it into the grocery store, mister, and make it into bullets.
Look here, Sonny. I don't fool that easy.
It's true. They make a bullet out of every spoonful.
Well, look at that.
Look at what?
I never thought I'd live to see it. Big as life. A lady soldier. Something's going on around here, Sonny. I'm a hermit, just a hermit, only come down from the mountains every 40 years or so. Looks like I've been missing something.
Why'd you come down this time, mister?
Tell you what, Sonny. Now and then I go and stand up on my ledge by my little old mountain, just stand there listening, that's all. Listening to the lonesome freight train crying through the valley. Listening, that's all. Just listening to hear what I can hear. Well, Sonny, lately I've been hearing things I couldn't figure. Ruckus and commotion, Sonny. Such a rumbling and thumping, such a grinding, chawing, booming that I says, old-timer, something's going on down there, I says, something new and big. So down I come to see what I can see. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, young women.
Hi.
What you doing?
Making planes?
What's that you're making?
Making planes.
Makes a heap of noise.
You ought to hear the noise these planes make over Europe.
Hi, young fellers. Where you going?
Going hunting.
What you hunting?
Men, killers,
torturers, and bullies.
Murderers.
Who'd the murder?
Folks who can't fight back. Old folks.
Sick and feeble.
Women. Women think they're lucky if they can get to die.
They murder little children, too.
Heard about that? They stand around and watch little children starve to death.
You're making that up.
No, those things are happening tonight. We'll get them for it.
Every one of them.
We're going after them with 700 different kinds of hell. Hear that?
More planes. And more and more.
Arms. We drop more than 3,000 tons on average every day. And that's only the beginning. Cannon.
Rockets.
Flamethrowers.
A lot of noise.
You ought to hear the noise in Europe.
What's that?
Tanks.
And that?
More of the same. Tanks rolling toward Berlin.
You know what that is?
Men. Marching.
Millions of them.
The free men of the world are marching together to victory. Let us beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Walter Houston broadcasting from Texarkana, where the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, Jr., has come for the official opening of the Fifth War Loan Drive.
Say?
The bond drive, the Fifth War Loan Drive.
Never heard of it.
Well, Timer, I don't think you're typical of Texarkana.
Ain't no such town. Besides, I ain't from there. I'm Hector. That's me, Hector the Hermit.
I see. And your profession?
Hermit. Heard the music, so come on in. Well, sir, this here's the rootin'est, tootin'est, gall-dangdest, big, enormous show I ever see. Hi there, young woman. Hi.
Hi there.
My name's Hector. I'm a hermit. Who are you?
Lois Andrews. I'm a movie actress.
And you?
Moorhead, Agnes Moorhead.
Them other folks up there, who's them?
Well, that's Keenan Wynn, and then there's Edgar Barry, and Alan Napier, and Natalie Darby. And you've just been talking to Walter Houston.
Who's the little girl? Hi, little girl.
Hi.
That's Gloria Jean.
What you doing up so late, young miss?
Same thing as everybody else, I guess. I'm selling bonds.
Bonds? I knew you folks were selling something because I got in free. Bonds, is it? What'll bonds cure? I ain't dealing. Ain't nothing wrong with me.
Well, there's a lot wrong with the world, old-timer.
That's why we've got a war on our hands. We're fighting what's wrong. And it's worth all we can give to make it right.
Now, don't start preaching at me.
There won't be any sermons here tonight, old-timer. We promise you that.
How's about some music?
Well, we're going to have some music now.
But we're not forgetting either that in many parts of the world tonight there isn't any music.
In the slave countries,
They haven't any reason for it.
This is Orson Welles, old-timer. He's the producer of this broadcast.
We're going to bring you music, but this broadcast is dedicated to the men and women who are too busy for music, to all our fighters on all the fronts. We can't think of better music for this broadcast than the Song of the United Nations. The Soviet composer Dmitri Shostakovich wrote it. Our allies to the south have given us their Mexican symphony to play it, and Leopold Stokowski from our own United States is going to conduct. We take you now to Mexico City. Well, we didn't get to Mexico City, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll go right on with the broadcast. And if we can find them later on, you'll hear from the Mexican Symphony. Walter Houston?
Walter Houston speaking again. To be precise, we're on the border between two states, Texas and Arkansas. The state line runs right up Main Street in this bright and busy little city, Texarkana, where we've taken our microphones for the opening of the 5th War Loan Drive.
No such town, I tell you.
You again?
Me, the hermit. Ain't no Texarkana. They's Tex and Ark. Two towns. They separate, Ark and Tex.
No, they aren't separate. But they used to be. Used to be a pretty wild country out here, and differences of opinion were settled mostly with guns and bowie knives. But that's all changed. It's a fine, neighborly, law-abiding community they've got here nowadays. So don't let anybody tell you there's something ornery in the nature of humans that make us have to fight each other, even around borders and boundary lines. You ought to see how well they get along here together in Texarkana. And when you write a letter here, you just address it Texarkana, USA. You couldn't ask for a nicer, friendlier settlement of a border dispute.
Mister, you talked me out of that one. But now about this war.
Now, look here, Mr. Hermit. I think that we've let you heckle us enough. A hermit is only a sort of a man I think of who doesn't know by now what this war is about. Frankly, we aren't fighting to make the world safe for hermits. We're fighting to make it safe for people everywhere who like to fight each other's and like each other's company. Safe for them to pray where they want to and say what they like to feel. We don't approve of governments that people are afraid of. We don't like anybody to go hungry. We don't think that peace and poverty get along together. A hermit wouldn't care about these things, but they mean everything to us. And here's another thing. We aren't fighting over territory. We're fighting over a difference of opinion. Here are the opinions. Even a hermit ought to recognize the difference. Here's Orson Welles, who wrote this show. And he's going to present them.
Just a minute, Walter. I didn't write what you're going to hear now. You're going to hear the real words of real people.
Our country intends to enforce national ideal through 7 seas of globe.
That was a statement by General Araki of Japan. Pope Pius XII.
There is no room for the violation of the freedom, integrity, and security of other states.
We're presenting for your consideration, ladies and gentlemen, the thoughts of real people, the people on our side and the others. In the democracies, in peacetime anyway, we like to think there are two sides to every question. Well, I give you Dr. Rosenberg, head of the Nazi Bureau.
The other side has no right to criticize. They should be grateful that they are still alive.
Please understand these are exact quotes. The other side has no right to criticize. They should be grateful that they are still alive.
The most beautiful thing in the world is freedom of speech.
Diogenes Laertius said that 200 years before the birth of Christ. I give you now Dr. Goebbels, head of Nazi propaganda.
With us, the subordinate does not criticize his superior, but only the superior subordinates.
Said Homer.
To speak his thoughts is every free man's right.
Discussions of matters affecting our existence and that of the nation must cease altogether.
That's a Nazi order, the precise terms.
Liberty of thought is the life of the soul.
All men are by nature equal.
Democracy arose from men's thinking that if they are equal in any respect, they are equal absolutely.
Voltaire, Plato, and Aristotle in that order. And now here's Herbert Spencer.
No one can be perfectly free till all are free.
As soon as man says of the affairs of the state, what does it matter to me? The state may be given up for lost.
That was Rousseau speaking. And now here's Thomas Jefferson.
where every man feels that he is a participator in the government of affairs, not merely at an election one day in the year, but every day, when there shall be not a man in the state who will not be a member of one of its councils, great or small, he will let his heart be torn out by his body sooner than his power be wrested from him by a Caesar or a Bonaparte.
A nation must be deceived if one will secure the devotion of the masses of the people.
That's Adolf Hitler's own formula for success. Deceive the people.
The American Revolution has shown us the happy truth that man is capable of self-government and only rendered otherwise by the moral degradation designedly superinduced on him by the wicked acts of his tyrants.
The basis of my program are blood, fire, and personality.
I see. Only free peoples can hold their purpose and their honors steady to a common end and prefer the interests of mankind to any narrow interest of their own.
Our youth will be educated to think and act as Germans.
Woodrow Wilson was speaking before Hitler interrupted him.
As long as they live, our German youth will never again be free.
Not if you have anything to do with it. Look here, I want to emphasize that these are Hitler's words. We didn't make up any of this. It's all true. Here's Dr. Lai, another Nazi.
We begin with a child when he is 3 years old. As soon as he begins to think, he gets a little flag put in his hands. Then follows the school, the Hitler Jugend, and military training. We don't let them go until the grave. We don't let them go until the grave, whether he likes it or not.
I give you the words of a Nazi children's song.
Peasants, leave your sowing. Little flowers will soon be growing. Peasants, leave your plowing. We plow soon with the sword.
Heil Hitler!
There is no place in the German universities for truth's sake.
A professor in Heidelberg, that was. Krieg is his name. And now a group of Nazi leaders, von Papen, Feder, von Killinger, group of ministers, and a youth leader.
Mothers must exhaust themselves to give life to children.
The holiest thing in the world is the wife who is both servant and slave.
I hate to keep repeating this, but what you're hearing are the real words of real men.
All I had to do was wink, and the brigadiers put the young girl over a wooden pole. Then they beat her with horsewhips until there wasn't a white spot left.
That happened. Those are real words, everybody.
We request that every hen lay between 130 and 140 eggs a year.
Down with Mickey Mouse! I give you Dr. Frank, Reichsminister of Justice.
Heil Hitler! We do not recognize any tradition of civil rights. We do not recognize civil rights. Heil Hitler!
Governor Linder.
The Jew has only one right, the right to die.
Pope Pius XII.
There is no place for open or occult oppression of minorities.
The Catholic and Protestant churches must vanish.
If, after a period in a concentration camp, anyone fails to appreciate the privileges of citizenship in the Third Reich, he had better leave the country.
Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Reichsminister Hermann Goering. One German alone in Germany decides over life or death. That is Adolf Hitler. Heil Hitler!
Jan Masaryk of Czechoslovakia.
Dictators always look good until the last 10 minutes.
Reich Minister Carroll.
God has manifested himself, not in Jesus Christ, but in Adolf Hitler.
My will!
My Führer!
My will! That must be the creed of all of us. Heil Hitler! Heil Hitler!
General Ludendorff.
I decline Christianity.
I beg your pardon.
I decline Christianity because it is Jewish, because it is international, and because it preaches peace on earth. Heil Hitler!
Everything you are through me.
Dr. Goebbels.
Everything the Führer utters is religion.
My will. That is your faith. My faith is for me.
You, my Führer, have given us our daily bread.
And here's Mussolini.
Fortunately, the Italian people is not accustomed to eating several times a day.
It is only on one or two exceptional points that Christ and Hitler stand comparison. For Hitler is far too big a man to be compared with one so petty.
But we Japanese are descendants of God.
Banzai. Christ was a false prophet, addicted to drink and cowardly like all Jews.
But we Japanese are descendants of God.
Banzai. Jesus is the enemy of all Germans.
But we Japanese are descendants of God.
Banzai. Jesus is the enemy of blood and race.
Besides General Araki, you've just heard from General Ludendorff and Herr Stryker. I'm going to have to tell you this again because I know it's hard to believe. These are real men.
My will. That is your faith.
You know what Franklin Roosevelt had to say about that? He said the world is too small to provide adequate living room for both Hitler and God. Our enemies, says Mr. Roosevelt, are guided by brutal cynicism, by unholy contempt for the human race. We are inspired by a faith which goes back through all the years to the first chapter of the book of Genesis. God created man in his own image. We on our side are striving to be true to that divine heritage. We're fighting, as our fathers have fought, to uphold the doctrine that men are equal in the sight of God. Those on the other side are striving to destroy this deep belief and to create a world in their own image, a world of tyranny and cruelty and serfdom. That is the conflict that day and night now pervades our lives. No compromise can end that conflict. There never has been, there never can be successful compromise between good and evil. Only total victory can reward the champions of tolerance and decency and freedom and faith.
It has been claimed that every race on this earth is a thought of God. Therefore, we claim complete separation between blood and blood in order to avoid God's thoughts being disturbed.
Now, that was a thought by Dr. Gross of the Nazi Office for Race Politics. And says Franklin Roosevelt, we must be vigilant against racial discrimination in any of its ugly forms. Any oppression, any injustice, any hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization.
We Japanese are descendants of God and shall rule the world.
Banzai.
Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God.
We're going to repeat that. A real man said that, too. It was Thomas Jefferson.
Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God.
The very first essential for success is a perpetually constant and regular employment of violence.
Marshal Tito.
We oppose violence. We are fighting for freedom.
Winston Churchill.
Has any benefit or progress ever been achieved by the human race by submission to organized and calculated violence? As we look back over the long story of nations, we must see that, on the contrary, their glory has been founded on the spirit of resistance to tyranny and injustice.
John Gajek.
The present war is between good and evil, between light and might, between freedom and slavery. There is no middle course. Now is the crucial moment for the whole future of mankind.
Charles Dickens.
Life is given to us on the definite understanding that we boldly defend it to the last.
Nikolai Lenin.
Man's dearest possession is life. He must live so as to feel no torturing regrets for years without purpose. So live is not to be feared by the shame of a cowardly and trivial task. So live that dying, he can say, all my life and all my strength were given to the finest cause in the world, the fight for the liberation of mankind.
Thomas Jefferson.
We are not to expect to be translated from despotism to liberty in a feather bed.
Tom Paine.
Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation within us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph.
Well, what about that triumph? What about the peace? Maxim Litvinov?
Peace is indivisible.
Peace is indivisible. It's time we thought about that. We've heard from the men we're fighting, and we've heard what we're fighting. Now we've come to the big question. What are we fighting for? Our president, the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, has told us this. We're fighting today for security, for progress, and for peace. Not only for ourselves, but for all men. Not only for one generation, but for all generations. And the test of our progress, says Mr. Roosevelt, is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide for those who have too little. Tonight we're hearing the words of the leaders of this war, and right here we're also bringing you the words of men who fought before in the same cause. More than a quarter of a century ago, an American president said, "We shall fight for the things we've always carried nearest our hearts, for democracy, for the rights of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own governments, for the rights and liberty of small nations, for the universal dominion of right by such a concert of free peoples as shall make peace and safety to all nations and make the world itself at last free." That was Woodrow Wilson. Well, what about that word democracy? I hope we're all agreed on what it means. Here's what another president said about it. Abraham Lincoln.
As I would not be a slave, so would I not be a master.
The people will accept only a master.
As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this, to the extent of the difference, is no democracy.
I give you Adolf Hitler.
You can keep him.
I give you Mussolini.
Try and find it.
Democracy is talking itself to death. The people do not know what they want.
Thomas Jefferson.
I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of society but the people themselves.
The people do not know what is best for them.
Abraham Lincoln.
Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in the world?
All that you are through me. Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
The real wisdom of human life is compounded out of the experiences of ordinary men.
Woodrow Wilson again.
America does not consist politically of the men who set themselves up to be political leaders. She does not consist of the men who do most of her talking. They are important only so far as they speak for that great voiceless multitude of men who constitute the great body and the saving force of the nation.
My will! That is your law! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
The genius of the United States is not best or most in its executives or legislatures, nor in its ambassadors or authors or colleges or churches or parlors, nor even in its newspapers or inventors, but always most in the common people. Their deathless attachment to freedom, the fierceness of their roused resentment, the air they have of persons who never knew how it felt to stand in the presence of superiors, their good temper and open-mindedness, the terrible significance of their elections, the president's taking off his hat to them, not they to him. Walt Whitman, our great American poet of democracy, wrote that. And now a great German poet of democracy, Heinrich Heine. If all Europe were to become a prison, America would still present a loophole of escape. And God be praised, that loophole is larger than the dungeon itself. I think the true discovery of America is before us, said Thomas Wolfe. I think the true fulfillment of our spirit, of our people, of our mighty and immortal land is yet to come. I think the true discovery of our own democracy is still before us. And I think that all these things are certain as the morning and inevitable as noon. I think I speak for most men living when I say that our America is here, is now, and beckons on before us, and that this glorious assurance is not only our living hope, but our dream to be accomplished. I think the enemy is here before us, too, but I think we know the forms and faces of the enemy, and in the knowledge that we know him and shall meet him, and eventually must conquer him, is also our living hope. I think the enemy is here before us with 1,000 faces, but I think we know that all his faces wear one mask. I think the enemy is single selfishness and compulsive greed. I think the enemy is blind, but has the brutal power of his blind grab. I do not think the enemy was born yesterday, or that he grew to manhood 40 years ago, or that we began without the enemy and that our vision faltered, that we lost the way and suddenly were in his camp. I think the enemy is old as time and evil as hell, and that he's been here with us from the beginning. I think he stole our earth from us, destroyed our wealth, and ravaged and despoiled our land. I think he took our people and enslaved them, that he polluted the fountains of our life, took unto himself the rarest treasures of our own possessions, took our bread and left us with a crust, and not content, for the nature of the enemy is insatiate, tried finally to take from us the crust.
Success is the sole earthly judge of right and wrong.
Japan must conquer the world.
We have buried the putrid corpse of liberty. My will! That is your faith!
Japan must conquer the world.
We have buried the putrid corpse of liberty. My will! That is your faith!
Oh, shut up. Well, we'll shut him up before long. Pretty soon.
Well, we are not to expect to be translated from despotism to liberty in a feather bed.
Thomas Jefferson said that. We mustn't forget it either. And you know, just now we started talking about America. Of course, we're only part of this war. But we're a big part of it and a proud part of it.
Light and liberty are on a steady advance. We have seen, indeed, once within the record of history, the complete eclipse of the human mind continuing for centuries. Even should the cloud of barbarism and despotism again obscure the scene, the science and liberties of Europe, this country remains to preserve and restore light and liberty to them. In short, the flames kindled on the 4th of July, 1776, have spread over too much of the globe to be extinguished by the feeble engines of despotism. On the contrary, they will consume these engines and all who work them.
Here, now, don't get sore at me for butting in.
Mr. Hermit, weren't you satisfied with what you heard? Do you still wonder what this war is about?
I'm satisfied, but there's something else. I wonder, could I get a word in with the Secretary of the Treasury?
Well, now, really, Hector,
That's all right, Mr. Houston. Hello, old-timer. My name's Henry Morgenthau, Jr. What can I do for you?
I reckon y'all are pretty sick of me speaking up in a meeting like this. But I don't get around much, being a hermit by persuasion. I didn't just quite catch the drift of what you fellas was talking about. Seems the war's still on. Is it a new war? Maybe you can set me straight, Mr. Morgenthau. What kind of a war is it anyway?
Those are pretty big questions, old-timer. I don't think those questions should be asked without some answers. I'd like to hear some.
Well, Mr. Secretary, here's a whole batch of bond pledges. Suppose you just pick one out of the hat, so to speak, at random.
All right. Here's one. Mrs. William H. Tanner.
Here.
Speak right into the microphone, Mrs. Tanner. Our friend, the hermit here, wants to know if this is the same war or a new one.
It's a new one.
Now, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes. Yes, I guess it's really a new war in every way because there are new hopes that go with it, for the future.
Mr. Secretary?
Well, we've got a better idea now about what the world ought to be like and what our duties are to each other to make it that way.
Yes.
Yes, I think we're all of us convinced today that we have an obligation to the needy, to the old, and to the sick. I think we're fully convinced at last that we simply haven't the right to let anybody starve for lack of food or a job.
Thank you, Mrs. Tanner. Will you pick out another name, Mr. Secretary?
All right, here's one.
Mr. Ralph H. Burling.
I disagree.
Here's the microphone, Mr. Burling.
Well, I don't disagree exactly, but still in all, I think we call this the same war.
Yes?
Yes, I'd say it started back in 1776.
Well, that's true in a way, of course.
Of course it's true.
What's that?
Oh, excuse me. You didn't call on me. I know I just spoke up without thinking.
That's all right. Go right ahead. Your name, please?
Rachel Vernon. Oh, but that doesn't matter. Excuse me, I'm just a high school girl. Well, I was just going to say that history shows that our democracy hasn't come very cheap.
Mr. Secretary?
If I understand this young lady correctly, she's saying that everything we value here, we've earned the hard way.
Yes, sir. We may have grown and prospered in the years of peace, but President Wilson said the right is more precious than peace.
Mm-hmm. Go on, Miss Vernon.
Well, I was just going to say that I think most of us have come to feel that there won't be real peace until after the last war. That's all. Thank you.
I think we all agree with you, Miss Vernon. I think we all agree that this is a war against war itself.
Oh, excuse me. What I meant to say is we've been fighting war from the beginning.
That's right.
I mean, America fighting war. We've never really stopped.
Right! And we won't stop till we won!
Good for you. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Secretary. Please go on.
We have strong allies now, brave friends fighting beside us in the field. We're the finest army in our history and the biggest navy in the world. And now we're sure of winning. But it won't be easy. We know that, too. It may be very hard, terribly hard. But here at home, we can make winning easier, and we can make it shorter. What's more, we could make this most recent battle in our long war for freedom the last battle. That's up to us. This is a people's war because they believe in this war, in its full justice, because they have confidence in the outcome and faith in its high purpose. The people are financing it. This people's war of ours is fought on fronts all over the world. Last week, we opened a new front on the continent of Europe. That front alone is the biggest project in military history. You can be sure that the invasion didn't begin until we were ready. And you must know that the getting ready cost a lot of money. General Marshall told me last Wednesday before he left for England that our war expenditures for the last 3 months of this year will be the highest yet, and we've just started. He told me, and these are his words, we've just started on the beaches of France a flaming war. Now, here are some cold facts. It cost $86,000 to lay a smokescreen across a 20-mile beachhead. I ask you to imagine the money required to land a single division of men. To march from Naples to Rome, it cost us $6.7 billion. That is just the American share, and includes the cost of the equipment and training of troops. I leave it to you to imagine what it will cost to march from Rome to Berlin. The cost of taking the Marshall Islands was $6 billion. That includes planes, oil, ammunition, ships, and the training and equipping of personnel. $6 billion. Again, I leave it to you to imagine what it will cost us to go from the Marshall Islands to Tokyo. We've spent almost $200 billion on the war already. By the end of the next fiscal year, we'll have spent at least $99 billion more for all purposes. Some of this we'll get from taxes, but we're still going to be short $57 billion. And this money we're going to have to borrow from you. With the United Nations, America has pledged to the total defeat of the enemy. Pledged, in the words of General Eisenhower, to bring about the destruction of the German war machine, elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. That's our definition of victory. We must not let the President, our Commander-in-Chief, worry whether we'll be able to pay for that victory. The harder we fight, the sooner we're going to win. If our armed forces don't get the money they need, all the money they need, they can't fight as hard and they can't win as soon. It's just as simple as that. The very life of democracy is a people's trust in themselves. The people can finance their security in a free world. We're doing it now, but the amount needed is tremendous. It begins with 10 cents. It goes up to anything you can afford. And it ends with victory, full victory, and a sure peace.
I'd like a word or two in this meeting.
Hello. Hello there. Who are you?
Me? I'm lots of people. Call me Joe.
Oh, welcome to the meeting, Joe. Stand up. We can't see you.
Sorry, I can't stand up. Besides, you wouldn't want to see me. I don't want you to. Not now. Maybe you've got a snapshot. Look at that. Remember something good we both enjoyed, something we liked together. Remember the last time you saw me smile. Mark where I left your life with that. A smile. That's how I'd like it.
Well, who are you, Joe?
Me? Thought I told you. Lots of people. I mowed your lawn and jerked your sodas. I washed your windows and soaped them on Halloween, and I broke one of them with a baseball, remember? I sat in your classroom. I ran the elevator in your office building. I brought your groceries and delivered your telegrams. And I even sang happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. I shined your shoes. Once I hit you with a snowball. You remember me. When you were sick, I made it worse, yelling, "Ole, ole, oxen free" out in the street. Woke you up in the middle of the night. That was me when I was little, bawling in the next apartment. Or maybe that was me, bawling in the next room. If that was me, you didn't mind it so much. And I don't have to remind you of anything. You remember. Like I say, I'm lots of people. You out there. Maybe you're my folks or my boss. Maybe you're my friend. Maybe you chased me out of your front yard. Maybe you and I were going to be married someday after the war. Maybe we got married. You may have borne my children. Maybe I'm your father. You out there, you're lots of people, too. But here's something definite, specific, final. It's about me. I'm not coming back. Look for my buddies when it's over there. They'll be back when the bands are playing and the bells all ringing. You'll see them marching through the snow of ticker tape, laughing and waving at the girls. Look for them, you'll find them. Thank God they're back. Thank me, too, if you think of it. Some of you won't think of anything else. You out there. What I've got to say is for you to hear. Better listen. Know who I am? I hope I'm nobody you love. But if I'm not yet,
Neither one of us is sure I won't be. Here's a question for you. What do you think I feel like when I hear you back there, talking about the peace I'll never live to see? I'll tell you how I feel about it. I feel just fine. Why do you think I'm staying over here? But right now, give me a minute of your time. First of all, I want to tell you that we're going to win this war. Sometimes it may not look that way to you. I don't mean the war news will be bad, though it may be bad. We've got a lot of desperate men to kill, and lots of them will do the killing before it's over. What I mean is, when I'm gone, for you who love me, it may look like the war's lost. Just for a while, anyway. Do this for me. Don't ever believe it. After the revolution, a lot of boys didn't get to go back home. We won that war all right, and life wouldn't be worth living if they hadn't thought enough of it to die for it. I remember some of you folks saying once that war doesn't make sense. Making war doesn't. You were right about that, but we didn't make this war. Our job is to end it, and I mean end it. We're going to smash the war makers and break them for good. That's winning the war, and that's what we're going to do, and that makes sense. All the sense in the world. I want you to hate those men who made the war. Don't hate the war. It's taken me away from you. But I want you to remember all the things they tried to take away. More important things than me. Not only for the world, important for you, too. I want you to be sure of that. I want those things to be more important to you than I am, because I want my death to mean something. You see, there isn't anything more I can do about it. All I can do is die. Its meaning something's up to you. That's up to you.
This is Henry Morgenthau, Jr. I'm happy to introduce our Commander-in-Chief. We bring you now the President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, all our fighting men overseas today have their appointed stations on the far-flung battlefronts of the world. And we at home have ours too. We are proud of our fighting men, most decidedly. But during the anxious times ahead, let us not forget that they need us too. It goes almost without saying that we must continue to forge the weapons of victory. The hundreds of thousands of items, large and small, essential to the waging of the war. This has been the major task from the very start, and it is still a major task. The hundreds of thousands of items, large and small, essential to the waging of the war. This has been the major task from the very start, and it is still a major task. This is the very worst time for any war worker to think of leaving his machine or to look for a peacetime job. And it goes almost without saying, too, that we must continue to provide our government with the funds necessary for waging war, not only by the payment of taxes, which, after all, is an obligation of American citizenship, but also by the purchase of war bonds, an act of free choice which every citizen has to make for himself under the guidance of his own conscience. Whatever else any of us may be doing, the purchase of war bonds and stamps is something all of us can do and should do to help win the war. I am happy to report tonight that it is something which nearly everyone seems to be doing, although there are now approximately 67 million persons who have or earn some form of income, including the armed forces, 81 million persons or their children have already bought war bonds. They have bought more than 600 million individual bonds. Their purchases have totaled more than $32 billion. These are the purchases of individual men and women and children. Anyone who would have said that this was possible a few years ago would have been put down as a starry-eyed visionary. But of such visions is the stuff of America. Of course, there are always pessimists with us, everywhere, a few here and a few there. I am reminded of the fact that after the fall of France in 1940, I asked the Congress for the money for the production by the United States of 50,000 airplanes per year. Well, I was called crazy. It was said that the figure was fantastic, that it could not be done. And yet today we are building airplanes at the rate of 100,000 a year. There is a direct connection between the bonds you have bought and the stream of men and equipment now rushing over the English Channel for the liberation of Europe. There is a direct connection between your bonds and every part of this global war today. Tonight, therefore, on the opening of this fifth war loan drive, it is appropriate for us to take a broad look at this panorama of world war. For the success or the failure of the drive is going to have so much to do with the speed with which we can accomplish victory and then peace. While I know that the chief interest tonight is centered on the English Channel and on the beaches and the farms and the cities of Normandy, we should not lose sight of the fact that our armed forces are engaged on other battlefronts all over the world, and that no one front can be considered alone without its proper relation to all. It is worthwhile, therefore, to make overall comparisons with the past. Let us compare today with just 2 years ago, June 1942. At that time, Germany was in control of practically all of Europe and was steadily driving the Russians back toward the Ural Mountains. Germany was practically in control of North Africa and the Mediterranean and was beating at the gates of the Suez Canal and the route to India. Italy was still an important military and supply factor, as subsequent long campaigns have proved. Japan was in control of the western Aleutian Islands, and in the South Pacific was knocking at the gates of Australia and New Zealand, and also was threatening India. Japan had seized control of most of the Central Pacific. American armed forces on land and sea and in the air were still very definitely on the defensive, and in the building up stage, our allies were bearing the heat and the brunt of the attack. In 1942, Washington heaved a sigh of relief that the first war bond issue had been cheerfully oversubscribed by the American people. Way back in those days, 2 years ago, America was still hearing from many amateur strategists and political critics, some of whom were doing more good for Hitler than for the United States. 2 years ago. But today, we are on the offensive all over the world, bringing the attack to our enemies. In the Pacific, by relentless submarine and naval attacks, amphibious thrusts, and ever-mounting air attacks, we have deprived the Japs of the power to check the momentum of our ever-growing and ever-advancing military forces. We have reduced the Jap shipping by more than 3 million tons. We have overcome their original advantage in the air. We have cut from a return to the homeland, cut off from that return, tens of thousands of beleaguered Japanese troops who now face starvation or ultimate surrender. And we have cut down their naval strength so that for many months they have avoided all risk of encounter with our naval forces. True, we still have a long way to go to Tokyo, but carrying out our original strategy of eliminating our European enemy first and then turning all our strength to the Pacific, we can force the Japanese to unconditional surrender or to national suicide much more rapidly than has been thought possible. Turning now to our enemy, who is first on the list for destruction, Germany has her back against the wall. In fact, 3 walls at once. In the south, we have broken the German hold on central Italy. On June 4th, the city of Rome fell to the Allied armies. And allowing the enemy no respite, the Allies are now pressing hard on the heels of the Germans as they retreat northward in ever-growing confusion. On the east, our gallant Soviet allies have driven the enemy back from the lands which were invaded 3 years ago. And the great Soviet armies are now initiating crushing blows. Overhead, vast Allied air fleets of bombers and fighters have been waging a bitter air war over Germany and Western Europe. They have had 2 major objectives: to destroy German war industries, which maintain the German armies and their forces, and to shoot the German Luftwaffe out of the air. As a result, German production has been whittled down continuously, and the German fighter forces now have only a fraction of their former power. This great air campaign, strategic and tactical, is going to continue with increasing power. And on the west, the hammer blow which struck the coast of France last Tuesday morning, less than a week ago, was the culmination of many months of careful planning and strenuous preparation. Millions of tons of weapons and supplies, hundreds of thousands of men assembled in England are now being poured into the great battle in Europe. I think that from the standpoint of our enemy, we have achieved the impossible. We have broken through their supposedly impregnable wall in northern France. But the assault has been costly in men and costly in materials. Some of our landings were desperate adventures, but from advices received so far, the losses were lower than our commanders had estimated would occur. We have established a firm foothold. We are now prepared to meet the inevitable counterattacks of the Germans with power and with confidence. And we all pray that we will have far more soon than a firm foothold. Americans have all worked together to make this day possible. The liberation forces now streaming across the Channel and up the beaches and through the fields and the forests of France are using thousands and thousands of planes and ships and tanks and heavy guns. They are carrying with them many thousands of items needed for their dangerous, stupendous undertaking. There is a shortage of nothing. Nothing. And this must continue. What has been done in the United States since those days of 1940, when France fell, in raising and equipping and transporting our fighting forces, and in producing weapons and supplies for war, has been nothing short of a miracle. It was largely due to American teamwork among capital and labor and agriculture, between the armed forces and the civilian economy, indeed, among all of them. And everyone every man or woman or child who bought a war bond helped, and helped mightily. There are still many people in the United States who have not bought war bonds, or who have not bought as many as they can afford. Everyone knows for himself whether he falls into that category or not. In some cases, his neighbors know too. To the consciences of those people, this appeal by the President of the United States is very much in order. For all of the things which we use in this war, everything we send to our fighting allies costs money, a lot of money. One sure way every man, woman, and child can keep faith with those who have given and are giving their lives is to provide the money which is needed to win the final victory. I urge all Americans to buy war bonds without stint. Swell the mighty chorus to bring us nearer to victory.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard the President of the United States.
This has been the special opening program of the Fifth War Loan, brought to you by the combined radio networks of this nation to remind you that our job is not yet done, that there is much for you to do before victory is within our grasp. You have heard the President of the United States, Mr. Henry Morgenthau, Secretary of the Treasury, Walter Houston, and many, many others. Orson Welles wrote and directed the portion of the production from Texarkana. This program originated in Texarkana and Washington, D.C., over the combined networks of the United States. This is the Blue Network.
Orson Welles speaking. This record is a rough synopsis of the Texarkana broadcast. No part of it should be considered a transcription of the actual show, but rather as an outline, a working sketch. Our effort here is not to audition any single element, but to suggest the structure of the whole. The script itself is almost completed, but no single part of that script can be called finished until the final words of the first draft are written and agreed upon. This transcription is an attempt to trace the directions I'm following in the writing in time for any and all changes that may be felt necessary. It's hoped for the Texarkana broadcast that it will be something considerably more than a series of speeches, more convincing and more effective. To ensure the acceptability of what we have to say, it's obvious we must employ our very maximum craft and ingenuity. Our message must sink in. We want it to burn deep. This calls for more than entertainment spiced with slogans. Calls for entertainment value, but I'm sure we all hope that entertainment value doesn't indicate the use of that tawdry and largely bankrupt form usually referred to as the variety show. That is to say, a sort of vaudeville interspersed with commercials.
In our propaganda arsenal, jokes and music are powerful weapons. But the intention here is to put them to use as punctuation and as accent, never as mere diversion or for the empty excuse of relief. In a record such as this, we have no means of reproducing the effect of the projected broadcast. It should be appreciated, then, that our aim is only to describe that effect. Well, then, after the opening and listing of important names involved, the program gets underway with a narrator explaining its nature and purpose and establishing Texarkana as its principal origination point. Proceedings are here interrupted by a member of the Texarkana audience, an eccentric member, to be sure, one Hector the Hermit, a man of many questions, who from first to last persists in wanting to know what it's all about. The excitement in town has smoked Hector out of his retreat. Now the old fellow wants to know what's up. It seems that Hector's retirement from the world has been so complete that he doesn't even know there's a war on. Mr. Morgenthau, the narrator, and other participants in the broadcast explain things to him. Hector's questions are such as might be asked by a visitor from another planet, and the answers he receives are intended to be comprehensive and specific enough to satisfy even such a stranger to the affairs of this world. Now, our hermit is frankly a dramatic device, a device which will inject a quiet humor wherever this may be considered appropriate, but Hector's actual dramatic purpose is serious. Our script is called The Summing Up, or at least that's a working title. It will attempt a lucid, popular, but at the same time a solidly thoughtful enumeration of the causes of this war, the war's immense importance in terms of civilization and democracy, and its consequent meaning for every living soul in America. The guilt of the enemy will be underscored and the war's highest objectives reaffirmed. This means that the script must spotlight many areas not unfamiliar to our audience, and the subjects to be considered, or at any rate most of them, won't be new. The questions our hermit asks are then the questions it's presumed American people would like to ask, the questions they do ask, and also the questions they don't ask, perhaps because they feel they're supposed to know the answers. The architecture of the script will be a compound of many sorts of address, from conversation to eloquence, drama, blank verse, music, and, more importantly, down-to-earth talk. The down-to-earth aspects of it are in great proportion to be Mr. Morgenthau's part in the program. Suggested that he speak several times during the hour, never at length, but always conclusively as a keynoter, and by way of adding up the several statements of the broadcast. Statements of faith and of fact. The narrator, who will be played by Walter Houston, now introduces the old hermit to Mr. Morgenthau.
Here's somebody who wants to talk to you. Hector, I'd like you to meet Secretary of the United States Treasury, Mr. Henry A. Morgenthau, Jr.
I'd like to ask this gentleman what he's done for the war effort.
Well, he claims he hasn't bought a single bond.
What's he?
You doing any volunteer work?
Can't say.
Helping the scrap drive, save fats? I don't think he knows what we're talking about.
Old timer.
What's he?
We're talking about the war.
Mr. Morgenthau, I tried to enlist, but they turned me down. Flat feet.
Well, aren't you pretty old for active service?
I was spry back when I volunteered, some of 98 it was.
Oh, that was another war, old-timer.
This time, everybody's fighting. No matter how old you are or how young, there's something you can do.
Well, Mr. Morgenthau, I'm the oldest critter in 3 states. Ain't nothing much I could do. I got my hands full keeping alive.
You can take that money out of your mattress and invest it in war bonds. Right, Mr. Morgenthau?
Right. But that isn't all. Buying war bonds is just part of the job.
Yeah, this here's a medicine show, sure enough. I knew you fellas had some kind of snake oil to peddle. Bonds, is it? Well, what a bonds cure? I ain't ailing. Ain't nothing wrong with me.
There's a lot wrong with the world, old-timer.
That's why we've got a war on our hands. We're fighting what's wrong, and it's worth all we can give to make it right.
Now, don't start a-preaching at me.
There won't be any sermons tonight, I promise you. We're just going to celebrate what this war is about.
Is there going to be any music?
Sure, we'll have music.
But let's not forget that in many parts of the world tonight, there isn't any music. On the battlefronts, they haven't time for music, and in the slave countries, they haven't any reason for it.
This broadcast is a celebration of the reasons for music.
It's dedicated to the men and women who are too busy for music, to all our fighters on all the fronts, and just now, particularly to the invasion forces. But as Mr. Morgenthau says, everybody's in this war. That's why we can't think of an overture more fitting for this program than the Song of the United Nations. It was written by a great Soviet composer, Dmitri Shostakovich. Our allies to the south have presented us with their splendid Mexican symphony to play it. And Leopold Stokowski from our own United States is going to conduct. We take you to Mexico City. That was the Song of the United Nations, conducted by Stokowski and played by the Mexican Symphony Orchestra in Mexico City. We're back now in the States, to be absolutely precise, on the border between two states, Texas and Arkansas. The state line runs up Main Street in this bright and busy little city where we've taken our microphones for the opening of the 5th War Loan Drive. Used to be pretty wild country around here, and differences of opinion were settled mostly with guns or bowie knives. But that's all changed. It's a fine, neighborly, law-abiding community that we've got here nowadays. So don't let anybody tell you there's something ornery in the nature of us humans that makes us have to fight each other, even around borders and boundary lines. You ought to see how well they get along together in Texarkana.
Ain't no such town.
I beg your pardon?
Texarkana. Ain't no such place.
Oh, you again?
Me, Hector the Hermit.
Hector the Heckler's more like it. What's that about Texarkana?
Oh, there's Tex and there's Ark. Two towns. Separate. Ark. Tex. Ain't no Texarkana.
All right, Hector. Okay, suppose you were right.
I'm always right.
Tex and Ark are legally two different cities, but you're wrong about their being separate.
They're separate and everybody knows it.
Sorry, everybody knows they aren't. But just suppose they were. Suppose that Tex and Ark were separate in ways that matter. Suppose they took their separateness seriously. Let's see what things would be like around here. Wait a minute. Hold the music. I forgot something. Half of this city's got to play the villain in our little drama, so we'll flip a coin to see who gets the part. I better get somebody you all trust to call it. How's about Shirley Temple? Okay? Okay. What do you make it, Shirley?
If it's heads, the villain's Texas. If it's tails, it's Arkansas.
All right, you toss the coin, Shirley.
All right.
And what is it?
Tails.
Okay, then Arkansas is the villain. And right here, I'd better mention what follows is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to persons living or dead is unintentional, irrelevant, and immaterial. And besides, we're only kidding.
Here follows a furiously fantastic interlude expressed in dialogue and music and in terms of the broadest satire. The idiocy of expansionist greed is played upon, and we are shown a paraphrase of the real war's background. Brutal fun is made of the doctrines of Lebensraum and the super race. This is wholehearted, downright comedy, the only thing of its kind in the broadcast. It's placed early in the show so as not to conflict with the mounting excitement of our basic line, but it doesn't appear before the seriousness of the main theme has been made clear. The feelings of the good people of Texarkana will be carefully considered. When our sketch is over, the narrator speaks as follows.
Ladies and gentlemen, the little play we just performed for you is a long way from the facts of the case. The folks in Texas and the folks in Arkansas are so far from being enemies that a lot of them live in one city together, right on the state line, just for company's sake. And when you write a letter here, you just address it Texarkana, USA. You couldn't ask for a nicer, friendlier settlement of a border dispute. No, what you just heard never happened in Texarkana and never will. Thank God. Wherever it has happened, there's nothing funny about it. If you could cleanse Hitler of the blood of Europe's millions, he'd show up as the prancing, paranoid little Schickelgruber we used to laugh at before we knew better. But the blood won't wash off, and many men are stained with it.
Captain Clark Gable of the United States Air Force is speaking. I'd like to underline what Mr. Walter Houston just said. Many men are stained with Europe's blood. Don't ever forget it. It takes a lot of people to murder 20 million human beings. Hitler and Himmler and Goebbels and Goering and all the rest of the gang leaders never would have been heard from outside of a beer hall in Munich if an awful lot of people hadn't cheered them on and done all their deviltry with no questions asked. Yes, Hitler gave the orders, but an order doesn't mean anything unless it's obeyed. Hitler would have been a harmless lunatic if nobody had listened. But millions did listen, and millions obeyed. And now we're at war with those millions. If you let somebody speak for you, you've got to answer for what he says. If you do what he tells you, whatever it is, then you're accountable. Looks like the invasion's going to start any minute now. I don't know just when. And nobody knows how many American lives we'll have to spend on it. As few as possible, you can be sure of that. But you can be sure of this, too. No matter how successful we are, a lot of boys aren't coming home. The Germans will try to stop us with their mines, their guns, their planes, and their tanks. But we won't be stopped. Who knows? They may even try throwing us Hitler and company, the big-time mobsters, I mean. Even a big lineup from the Nazi Party, thugs, hoods, and triggermen. But that won't stop us either. That's just another kind of appeasement. We've decided that appeasement doesn't work. I have a message here for the 5th War Loan Drive. It's addressed to the American people. I quote, "Our terms are on the record. Our terms are clear. Unconditional surrender. That's what we're after, and we won't take anything else." Signed, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Forces, a European theater.
Here follows a montage. The music ominous and determined, with a contrapuntal theme martial and aggressive, and sound effects expressing the scope and intensity of American war industry. Our hermit, the inquisitive Hector, encounters some young defense workers.
Hi, young women. What you got there?
A riveter.
And indeed, riveting is important at this moment in the sound pattern. Hector shouts above the yammer of the machines.
What you doing?
Making planes.
Makes a heap of noise.
You ought to hear the noise these planes make over Europe.
Sound and music paint the picture of an air armada. And now, on mic, we hear a plane revving up.
Hi, young fellas. Where you going in the aeroplanes?
Sorry, that's a secret.
Now, hold on there. My name's Hector. I'm a hermit.
My name's Tyrone Power. I'm a lieutenant in the Marines.
You all pretty sore at 'em over there, looks like. What you sore about?
Talking about Germany?
I'm asking you.
What do you want, old-timer? Reasons? That's like asking an executioner why he turns on the juice in the electric chair. We're killing murderers. That's our job.
I'm a hermit. I've been holed up quite some time. I hadn't heard. Who'd they murder?
Folks who can't fight back. Old folks, the sick and feeble. Women. Women think they're lucky if they die. They murder little children, too. You heard about that? They stand around and watch the little children starve to death.
You're making that up.
No, those things are happening tonight. We'll get 'em for it, every one of them. All the tyrants, big and little. All the torturers, the liars, and the bullies. Every one, every last one of them. We're going in after them with 700 different kinds of hell. Hear that?
More planes. More and more.
You ought to hear what it sounds like over Europe and what it's going to sound like.
We hear the scream and the thunder of a blockbuster.
Bombs.
Bombs. We drop 3,000 tons a day, on average. That's only the beginning.
It must be understood that this scene gains its forcefulness only from the machinery of radio production. And for this transcription, we have no means of suggesting the proposed effect.
Cannon, rockets, flamethrowers, tanks. Listen. That's what they're going to sound like rolling toward Berlin.
A marching song gains on the first musical theme here, and there is audible the triumphant drumming of marching feet.
Hear that? That's men. Men marching, millions of them, marching to victory.
Awful big show, I'll say that.
The invasion? Big? Wait and see, old-timer. The biggest show on earth.
Here, sound effects and orchestra swell to a full impressionist statement of the invasion. And now the solemn chords of the battle hymn bring the sequence to a stirring finish. Again, I must emphasize that no notion of the effect in performance can be transmitted here. Constant and dramatic change of pace is obviously essential to this sort of program, and this part of it is frankly fireworks, another essential, so long as the content is genuine and the intention sincere. In contrast to the comedy of the preceding sketch, this strong announcement of the theme of actual war should work, I think, splendidly, its main purpose being to establish the mood and size of the invasion. Well, when we've expressed something of the immensity of America's war industry, the goodwill and firm determination of American war workers, we've heard from the military, and our radio production has made its best efforts to convey some sense of our fighting power and, more significantly, the fighting spirit behind it. Now we examine the very banners our fighting men are carrying into battle, democracy itself. And this we contrast by the ideas opposing it. The nightmarish cynicism of Mein Kampf, the rampant lunacy of men like Rosenberg and Goebbels, a pattern of the fascist Nazi lies against the noblest affirmations of democracy. Pericles is heard from, and Plato and Tom Paine, Jefferson and Jackson, Lincoln and Whitman and Roosevelt. The sequence is brief but highly legible, and our listeners are given democracy's brightest definitions to match the enemy's blackest ridicule of man's equality, of God and his churches, of human decency itself. One of our finest composers is preparing the musical score for this, and a number of the outstanding talents among Hollywood stars will read the lines in the dramatic argument. Pronouncement of the four freedoms brings this montage to a hopeful conclusion, and we again establish for our listeners the origination place of the broadcast, an auditorium in Texarkana, deep in the heart of the American continent.
Looky here now. Don't get sore at me for butting in again. This is Hector the Hermit.
Yes, so you keep telling us.
I wonder, could I get in another word with the Secretary of the Treasury?
Well, now, really, Hector, you know...
Only take a minute. Mr. Morgenthau.
Yes, old-timer?
I reckon you're pretty sick of me speaking up in a meeting like this.
What do you think?
Well, no, I don't get into town much, being a hermit by persuasion. And I didn't just quite catch the drift of just what you fellas was talking about. It seems there's a war still on. Is it a new war? Maybe you can set me straight, Mr. Morgenthau. What kind of a war is it anyway?
Well, those are pretty big questions, but I think just about everybody knows the answers.
Everybody except hermits.
Just set your mind at rest, Bob. There ain't many of me.
Even so, I don't think that those questions should be asked without some answers. I'd like to hear some.
Well, Mr. Morgenthau, here's a whole batch of bond pledges here. Suppose you just pick one out of the hat, so to speak, at random. Eh?
All right. Here's one. Mrs. William H. Leiter.
Here.
All right, here's the microphone right here, Miss Leiter. Now, Hector the Hermit wants to know if this is the same war or a new one.
It's a new one.
Anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes. I guess it's really a new war in every way because there are new hopes that go with it. You know, for the future.
I agree with Mrs. Leiter. This war has awakened in all of us a new sense of responsibility.
Responsibility?
By the people, for the people.
That's right, Mr. Morgenthau. We've got a better idea about what the world ought to be like than we ever had before.
Yes, and I think we're convinced now that we owe something to the needy and to the old and to the sick. I think we're fully convinced at last that we simply haven't the right to let anybody starve for lack of food or a job.
Thank you, Mrs. Leiter. Pick out another name, Mr. Morgenthau.
All right. Here's one.
Mr. Ralph H. Burling?
I disagree.
Speak directly into the microphone, please, Mr. Burling.
Well, I don't disagree exactly, but still in all, I think I'd call this the same war.
Yes?
Yes, I'd say it started back in 1776.
That's true in a way, of course. Of course it's true.
What's that?
Oh, excuse me. You didn't call on me, I know.
I just spoke up without thinking.
Not at all, miss. Go right ahead.
Your name, please?
Rachel Vernon, but that doesn't matter. Excuse me, I'm just a high school girl.
No, please, go on. We're proud of our free speech. Let's have a little.
Well, I was just going to say that history shows that our democracy hasn't come very cheap.
Mr. Morgenthau?
Yes. Everything we value here, we've earned the hard way.
Yes, sir. We may have grown and prospered in the years of peace, but President Wilson said the right is more precious than peace.
Go on, Miss Vernon.
Well, I was just going to say that I think most of us have come to feel that there won't be real peace until after the last war. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, I think we all agree with you, Miss Vernon. I think we all agree that this war is a war against war itself.
Excuse me. What I meant to say is we've been fighting war from the beginning.
That's right.
America, I mean. Fighting war. We've never really stopped.
Right. We won't stop till we've won.
Good for you. Excuse me, Mr. Morgenthau. Please go on.
Well, we have strong allies now. Brave friends fighting beside us in the field. We have the finest army in our history and the biggest navy in the world. We're going to win this battle, but it won't be easy. Maybe very hard, terribly hard, but we here at home can make it easier. And what's more important, we can make this latest battle in our long war to win freedom and to hold it the last battle. That's up to us.
Here, music marks a paragraph after Mr. Morgenthau's remarks, and then our mood is again fantastic, but this time very solemn. The voice of a young man is heard. I'd like a word or two in this meeting.
Hello there. Who are you?
Me? I'm lots of people. Call me Joe.
Welcome to the meeting, Joe. Stand up. We can't see you.
Sorry, I can't stand up. Besides, you wouldn't want to see me. I don't want you to. Not now. Maybe you've got a snapshot. Look at that. Remember something good we both enjoyed. Something we liked together. Remember the last time you saw me smile. Mark where I left your life with that. A smile. That's how I'd like it.
Who are you, Joe?
Me? I thought I'd told you. Lots of people. I mowed your lawn and jerked your sodas. I washed your windows and soaped them on Halloween. I broke one of them with a baseball, remember? I sat in your classroom. I ran the elevator in your office building. I brought your groceries and delivered your telegrams. I even sang happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And I shined your shoes. Once I hit you with a snowball. You remember me. When you were sick, I made it worse, yelling Ole, Ole, Olsen free out in the street. I woke you up in the middle of the night. That was me when I was little, bawling in the next apartment. Or maybe that was me, bawling in the next room. If that was me, you didn't mind it so much. I don't have to remind you of anything. You remember. Like I say, I'm lots of people. You out there, maybe you're my folks or my boss, maybe. Or my friend. Maybe you chased me out of your front yard. Maybe you and I were going to be married someday after the war. Maybe we got married. You may have borne my children. Maybe I'm your father. You out there, you're lots of people, too. But here's something definite. Specific, final. It's about me. I'm not coming back. Look for my buddies when it's over there. They'll be back when the bands are playing, the bells all ringing. You'll see them marching through the snow of ticker tape, laughing and waving at the girl. Look for them. You'll find them. Thank God they're back.
Thank me, too, if you think of it. Some of you won't think of anything else. You out there, what I've got to say is for you to hear. You. You, too. Better listen. Know who I am? I hope I'm nobody you love. But if I'm not yet, neither one of us is sure I won't be. The voice of the young man continues. He is the boy who isn't coming back. He asks us what we think he feels like when he hears us talking about the peace. The peace he'll never live to see. I'll tell you what I feel about it, he says. I feel just fine. Why do you think I'm staying over here? He says. Now, this is blank verse set to music, and we can only indicate now the subject. But the boy goes on something like this. First of all, I want to tell you that we're going to win this war. Sometimes it may not look that way to you. I don't mean the war news will be bad, though it may be bad. We've got a lot of desperate men to kill, and lots of them will do the killing before it's over. What I mean is, when I'm gone, for you who love me, it may look like the war's lost. Just for a while, anyway. Do this for me. Don't ever believe it. After the revolution, a lot of men and boys didn't get to go back home. We won that war all right, and life wouldn't be worth living if they hadn't thought enough of life to die for it. I remember some of you folks saying once that war doesn't make sense. Making war doesn't. You were right about that. But we didn't make this war. Our job is to end it. And I mean end it, not just a truce. I mean we're going to smash the war makers and break them for good. That's winning the war, and that's what we're going to do. And that makes sense. All the sense in the world. I want you to hate those men who made the war. Don't hate the war. It's taken me away from you, but I want you to remember all the things they tried to take away. More important things than me, not only for the world, important for you, too. I want you to be sure of that. I want those things to be more important to you than I am, because I want my death to mean something. You see, there isn't anything more I can do about it. All I can do is die. Its meaning something's up to you. That's up to you. Back now in the prosier atmosphere of the auditorium in Texarkana, our inquiring hermit, the persistent Hector, allows he's been given a pretty good notion of what the war is about, but he wants to know something more about those fellows in Germany, the Nazis. Most of all, he wants to know when it all happened. Mr. Morgenthau offers that question to his audience, and we hear about Ethiopia and Manchuria and Munich, not from political experts, but from folks in Texarkana. One lady, Mrs. Thompson, had a boy who fought in China with the Flying Tigers, and she tells her story at length. This is the principal dramatic portion of our script, not the tale of young Larry's adventures in the Orient, but his mother's side of it, his girl's side of it, and the way it looks to his young brother, who grows up during the story, is drafted, and who, on June 12th, 1944, is perhaps a part of the invasion, or at least waiting for it in England with millions of other boys, by the time our broadcast overtakes him. This is a story about Texarkana and how war came to it. Slowly at first, and then with terrible suddenness. It's Larry Thompson's story, who went out to meet the war in China, and it's his mother's story, who resisted the war, who denied its possibility, and who comes to a full understanding of its meaning in her life only after that war has taken from her firstborn son. It's a simple human story full of easy reference for our audience. a small town story about the greatest war in world history. We trace back the war's causes and beginnings as the news came to Texarkana over the radio sets and in the local newspaper. In a word, it's the story of a hero's hometown. And it reaches its climax on June 12th. Before this section of the program, our canvas has several times been very large. Now it's very small. But here, I think, is where we'll manage to tell our biggest story. When Mrs. Thompson is finished, Mr. Morgenthau thanks her. And then he sums up.
As a matter of fact, that's what we've called this broadcast, the summing up. We've taken a look at the how and the why of the war. We've looked ahead a little to the sort of world we're fighting to give our children. And I think this is a good time for summing up on the eve of the invasion.
And here Mr. Morgenthau adds up what the broadcast has tried to say. He tells our listeners what the invasion will mean to them. We're wrong if we think it's the end of the war, he tells us. True, it will end the war, but no man on earth can say how soon. For a time, at least, for many of us whom the war hasn't touched, the invasion will be the war's beginning. We must be ready for anything. Long defeats and big casualty lists. We must prepare ourselves for that. And for victory, too. Victory calls for preparation. That's the gist of our script. Mr. Morgenthau's suggestions will alter or add to that message, and our script will be changed to conform with his thoughts. There are a number of devices for introducing General Marshall and finally the President, if he decides to speak on the program. But these won't be developed until definite word is available as to the content and subject of their speeches.
Thank you for listening to and showing your support for my podcast. If you would like to receive notifications of when new episodes are posted, please subscribe to my channel. Subscriptions are 100% free, and they really help me get an idea of how I'm doing. Well, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, stay safe, wish you well, and as always, peace.